What up, Cavs Nation? I'm your host, Ethan Sands, and I'm back with another episode of the Wine and Gold Talk podcast. I'm joined by your favorite beat reporter, Chris Fedor, and we are here to talk to you guys about a lot of different things going on in the NBA world. And today was kind of a big day because for the second time in almost exactly 20 years, the Los Angeles Lakers failed to sign a college coach to an NBA deal that would have made them one of the top paid coaches in the league. Chris, I mean, the Lakers are struggling when it comes to that dynamic right now. What do you think about what do you think about what went on today and the UConn coach deciding to go back to college in pursuit of his third straight NCAA title in a row? Dan Hurley, what do you think about the situation going on?
Lakers at some point have to understand that the mystique and everything about them that they think is so appealing to people is not all that appealing to people. Everybody's going to do their homework. Everybody's going to look at every situation. They're going to decide, is this the best thing for my career? Is this the best thing for me at this point in time? Is this the kind of money that is going to make me want to sign up for everything that job entails? They lowballed Ty Lue, who is a championship coach, and he decided to walk across the hall, and now he's in Clipperland for however many years. And they're still here searching for a coach. So they have to understand that purple and gold is not a selling point as it is. So you're going to have to do things that maybe are outside your comfort zone to try and get these guys. Dan Hurley has options. One of those options is going back to Connecticut and getting a fat contract and having an opportunity to win 3 straight national championships. There's appeal to that for somebody like Dan Hurley. Sure, the NBA is appealing to him. Sure, being a part of the Lakers is appealing to him. But you're going to have to go outside your comfort zone, and you're going to have to go above and beyond to try and lure the best of the best, or the perceived best of the best. And they lowballed Ty in the offer that they made to Dan Hurley, although it would have made him one of the highest paid coaches in the NBA. It's not all that. I mean, 6 years, $70 million. Like, there were reports that it was going to be 8 years, $100 million. That's way different. I mean, he can go back to Connecticut and he can get like 6 years, $50 million or something along those lines. So I just think the Lakers have to understand that if they're going to value and prioritize a coach, one of the top coaches on the market, it's going to mean you have to pay that guy a different way than what you've had to pay in the past.
100%. And I know you brought up Ty Lue, and I wanted to talk about what the other guy who we were talking about earlier was the other 20 years ago when the Lakers offered Mike Krzyzewski the deal that almost changed the NBA.
No. What did you just call him? Like,
oh my God.
This sounds like the commercial from way back in the day where the dude just mispronounces his name 5 different ways, and all of them are incorrect. You want to try that again? Would you like to buy a vodka?
Coach K. that's what I'm going at. Coach K.
Shefsky.
You know, it's crazy. My dad went to Duke, so I've been watching Mike and Coach K my entire life, and I still will never be able to pronounce that man's name correctly. So,
Lord.
Sorry, Coach K. Hope you're listening and tuning into the Wine and Gold Talk podcast. But we gonna get it right for you, I promise. But
it's
yeah,
definitely not Kurzewski. At least you didn't go that direction.
No,
I did. Was just way off. Shefsky.
But Coach K got a big deal offer from the Lakers 20 years ago in 2004, and back then the market wasn't what it is now. So you look at that contract and how much that could have changed the legacy of the NBA. But so 2 coaches from college that had a great reputation that turned down the Lakers offer, and now the Cavs are in pursuit of James Borrego, who was the New Orleans New Orleans assistant coach. And also, James Borrego has been in talks with the Los Angeles Lakers. He's, by reports, the only candidate that has interviewed twice with the Lakers in Los Angeles. So and I know, Chris, you've talked about how the conversations with the Cavs and Borrego have been heating up over the last couple of days, over the past weekend. Can we talk a little bit more about what you've been hearing around the league about Borrego in this situation and what's going on there?
Well, look, there are two teams that have a coaching opening, obviously. Maybe there's going to be a third. I don't know what's going to happen in Detroit. That's an interesting situation to monitor because the people that are now running the Pistons certainly didn't pick Monty Williams and they didn't give him that big contract. So I do think that that is one to monitor. But for now, it's the Cavs and the Lakers. And it feels like both these teams, if they had their choice, would want this search to be done by draft night. And the draft is now less than 3 weeks away. That doesn't mean that you're going to rush your process, and it doesn't mean that just because the Lakers struck out on what was perceived to be their top target in Dan Hurley, that all of a sudden the Cavs have to do something different and they have to speed up their process because they're worried about somebody picking the Lakers over them or something like that. You have to do what you have to do to make sure you get this right. This is a very important decision for the Cavs. It's a very important decision for the Lakers. So I don't think that either team is going to rush this. For the Lakers, it feels like there's a sense of, okay, now we got to regroup. All right, where do we go from here? We missed out on our top guy. Do we go to JJ Redick? Do we go back to James Borrego? Do we go back to Kenny Atkinson? Do we try and throw another curveball and see if Jay Wright is interested in coming off of TV or something along those lines? Who knows what the Lakers are going to do? But James Borrego, it does feel like, is a legitimate candidate for both spots. And I think it's going to come down to a bunch of different factors. And one of those is, where is he going to be most comfortable? What does he think is the best situation for him from a coaching standpoint? There's obviously an appeal to coaching in Los Angeles, right? It's LA, it's the Lakers, it's a chance to coach LeBron, but that's not for everybody, right? The Lakers situation and all of the pressure and all of those expectations, it's not for everybody. And if you're somebody like James Borrego, who is trying to change your reputation and trying to be looked at as somebody more than just, a retread coach or a pop disciple or a guy who is just an X's and O's offensive scheme master type guy. You want to put yourself in a situation where you feel like you can be successful. The roster matters. The front office matters. The organization and its willingness to spend and put the right people in place. All of that matters. And if he were to get this opportunity with the Lakers, say he chooses that over the Cavs, then you're talking about the possibility, like the Lakers are a team that has just cycled through head coaches quickly, recently anyway. So you have to consider that if you're somebody like Borrego. And if he were to choose the Lakers and then they ultimately go a different direction in a couple of years, he would be looked at as somebody who failed in Charlotte and then failed again in Los Angeles. Does he get another head coaching job? Like all those kinds of things, these coaches have to think about. And all of those things have to be considered if you're somebody like James Borrego. And everybody that I have tried to talk to about Borrego, all of my contacts that I know from the Charlotte Hornets organization, the New Orleans Pelicans organization, it just feels like to me the situation in Cleveland is a little bit more appealing for that kind of guy rather than the glitz, the glamour, and the big old spotlight in Los Angeles. It takes a certain kind of coach to be successful with the Lakers and deal with everything that comes with being the Lakers coach. And the people that I have talked to recently seem to think that Cleveland would be a better fit for him. I don't know him personally. I can only go by the smart people that I talk to that know him pretty well. And they all point to Cleveland as something that would be more appealing to him. We'll see.
And so I got into that same kind of discussion, Chris, with our subtexters, because obviously we understood that with the Dan Hurley rejection of the offer from the Lakers, it turns to James Borrego is in kind of a little bit of a bidding war when it comes to the Lakers and the Cavaliers and where he wants to be and what he sees as the best fit, like you were talking about. And I'm of the essence of talking to our subtexters to try and figure out where their heads were at. So I sent out a poll to our subtexters talking about who or where would you rather coach with the situations as they are right now. So I made it clear. I tried to make it as clear as possible. If you had to choose between coaching the Los Angeles Lakers with LeBron James, Anthony Davis, and their role players, or the Cavs with their core force still intact, which would you pick? And our subtexters came back with a roaring, resounding answer in this poll. 88% of the voters said that they would want to coach the Cleveland Cavaliers, and just 12% said that they wanted to coach the Los Angeles Lakers. Sure, is this a subtext group that is a Cavs community? Yes. Could that have skewed the vote a little bit? Probably yes. But does this make me more interested in trying to figure out what the entire Cleveland community thinks about this question, and maybe even turning this into an article for Wednesday, Chris? It piques my interest because you think about what James Borrego can do. You mentioned it, X's and O's, player development, where he can take this group as it is right now, Donovan Mitchell, Darius Garland, Evan Mobley, Jared Allen, versus, like you said, go into the spotlight and having to deal with the LeBron James of the NBA, a guy who is known for having conflicts with coaches, having an ego, trying to figure out what he wants in this organization, in this group, and the potential that he might not be there after this season. And I think that is where we go with this next, is trying to figure out what is most important for these two teams that are both on the cusp and trying to get back to their respective conference finals and also trying to make it to the NBA finals. Which team do you think you would rather coach based on where their situations lie right now if you had your choice?
Well, this becomes complicated, right? Because, like, on one hand, coaching LeBron James, there is a great benefit to that. You have a chance, you feel like, to compete for a championship every single year that LeBron is there. Even at this stage of his career, LeBron is one of the 10 to 15 best players, one of the 8 to 10 best players in the NBA. Like, he's somebody who's going to be in the running for all NBA every single year. Is he MVP LeBron, who just, tore up dynasties and ripped apart everybody in the Eastern Conference for 4 straight years while he was with the Cavs? No, he's not that kind of guy. But you can certainly see him being the best player still on a championship level team. It's also more difficult in the West because you've got Denver looming out there. Dallas probably isn't going anywhere. So that's something that you have to consider. The Clippers, if they all stay together, that could be a formidable group to have to deal with. But there is an appeal to coaching LeBron. There's also a lot of drawback to coaching LeBron. As you mentioned, Ethan, like, he bumped Eric Spoelstra. Like, he was trying to see if he could test Eric Spoelstra, and it took, Pat Riley and Dwayne Wade basically saying, look, dude, like, Spo's going to be the guy. None of this passive-aggressive stuff, right? Just accept the fact that that is your coach. That's not changing. You know what I mean? But, like, LeBron isn't the easiest guy to coach. Because he does test these guys in a different kind of way, because he does roll his eyes, because he does change some things on the fly. So there's a benefit to coaching LeBron because of what comes with that and the opportunities that come with that and the chance to compete for a championship. But LeBron can make it really, really difficult on a coach, and you have to have the right personality. You have to have the right cachet. You have to have the right demeanor and all that kind of stuff. And the Lakers are more of like an aging roster that seems to have some holes attached to it. Um, I don't know. I think there are obviously drawbacks to the Cleveland situation too, right? Because you could argue that the core four doesn't fit. I think the Cavs are still trying to figure out if the core four fits. So, like, the four most important players in the organization, the four highest paid players in the organization, may not be the right blend. So that gets a little bit tricky. What's going to happen with Donovan Mitchell? His long term situation. That gets a little bit tricky. Donovan can be difficult on coaches too. Like, if he doesn't have confidence in you, if he doesn't have belief in you, that's something that can percolate. That's something that can trickle throughout the entire roster. I still think, though, like, I don't want to say that the Cavs are this great run organization or anything along those lines. So I don't want it to be skewed. But, like, the moves that they have made recently would give me more confidence if I was a coaching candidate in the direction of that organization, the stability of that organization, and other various factors than Los Angeles, just because we're comparing those two teams. We're not comparing the Cavs to the Celtics, right? We're not comparing the Cavs to the Nuggets. We're not comparing the Cavs to the Miami Heat. We're talking about the Los Angeles Lakers, and they have had an abundance of missteps over the last 3 to 5 years that would probably make me a little bit cautious if I was a coaching candidate, especially a coaching candidate like Borrego, who this may be my next last chance. Or if you're Kenny Atkinson, like, this may be your last chance as a head coach. Because if you're looked at as a two-time failure and you haven't had enough success at any level to, like, back that up as a coach, like, it's hard to overcome that. So I think situationally there are drawbacks to both, but I'll give a slight edge to the Cavs just because of, like, the decision making from the organization over the last 3 to 5 years has been better than what has transpired out in Los Angeles. Like, if the Lakers didn't have LeBron, like, where would they be? What would be the appeal of that organization? What would be the reputation of that organization?
And I think it's interesting because I think these are the two toughest teams in conversations for head coaching gigs, like from this entire head coaching search this past offseason, because you realize the dire need for the Cavs to take that next step with Donovan Mitchell and the core four potentially still being around, but also understanding that you want to keep building with Evan Mobley and those things. And the Cavs are also known to have switching up during the seasons of coaches, not as much as the Lakers, but it still is in their history. And then you look against and across and look at the Lakers, and it's like, well, you only have so much time left with LeBron. So right. You need to maximize that, and you don't know how healthy Anthony Davis is going to be, how well he's going to play with and or without LeBron. So you want to maximize that opportunity as well. And I think that's what makes this so difficult, is because you don't understand, when you do understand the difficulties of the situation that you're coming in as both the head coach of either the Cleveland Cavaliers or the Los Angeles Lakers. It's not an easy situation on either side.
Right.
But Chris, I think that wraps up that topic, and because we don't want to beat the nail over the head with the hammer too much on that.
Yeah.
But I wanted to move on to our next interview style segment, but we're going to have a little two-parter today because we're getting into the rotational guys that didn't get as many minutes or made it past the 5-game mark at all in this case. So the first guy we're going to talk about today is Ty Jerome. Ty Jerome played in 2 games this past season. And, I mean, you can't really talk about a guy who was absent. But I wanted to hear if you had any updates for all the Ty Jerome stans that are craving for any information on his injury to his ankle, and if there has been any update on how he's recovering. Because he's been in a walking boot, he's been out of a walking boot. He's been on the sideline with the Cavs. He's been at home games. He's been happy-go-lucky, as it seems. But he hasn't been at practice, or hadn't been at practice, hadn't been at shoot-arounds, or any of that. Even when he was in a walking boot, we saw him taking standing shots just because he wanted to be around earlier in the season. But
Yeah.
since then, not much was seen of Ty Jerome.
I think this was a really hard situation on him. I haven't had an opportunity to talk to him since the season ended. I've reached out in multiple ways to try and have a sit-down interview with Ty, probably over the phone. It's harder now, Ethan, because these guys leave the market. Ty Jerome goes wherever he goes for the off season, and it's harder for people to get in contact with him to get a phone call returned, especially when the request is this, right? But I have reached out to multiple people to try and have a sit-down conversation with him just about this season, because look, the Cavs like him. The Cavs, they tried to get him a couple of years ago in free agency. He decided to play for the Warriors instead. Kobe Altman has known him for a very long time. Obviously, Donovan Mitchell has known Ty for a very long time. So it seemed like this situation was going to be the one for Ty, where he was going to get an opportunity. He was going to have a place in the rotation. He was going to be valued by the organization that signed him in the offseason. So this was kind of the situation and the setup that he had been looking for throughout the course of his career. And if you remember, like earlier in the year, before any games were played, I asked Ty about why he thinks he's been viewed as a career backup as opposed to a guy who has gotten a legitimate opportunity to show that he's something more than that, or even something more than just a third guard, depending on the situation. And, he kind of brushed that question aside, and I would fully expect him to do that. But like, this was an opportunity that was there for him. The Cavs needed his size, they needed his length, they needed his ball handling, they needed his shooting and his spacing, especially during a stretch of the season where they were without Darius Garland for 6 weeks. Darius is somebody who hasn't been the healthiest guy throughout the course of his career, so minutes were going to be there for Ty. It's just he wasn't healthy enough to take advantage of those. So I'm very curious to see how he handled this past year from a mental standpoint, because it also was a situation where it's his first year, new city, new organization, new teammates, trying to learn all that kind of stuff, trying to get comfortable in this new environment when the thing that you were brought here for is taken away from you. The thing that you love to do most is taken away from you. That's got to be really, really difficult. And I'm curious to know how he got through it during the season. There were times where he thought he was coming back and he was making progress and he was on the court trying to do some workouts. Then all of a sudden, his ankle doesn't feel right. So that messes with you mentally. You're like, what am I supposed to do? I'm doing all the things that I need to do behind the scenes and my ankle's just not responding. So I think it would be a fascinating conversation if it ever happens with me and Ty. But in saying all of that, he's on the roster. If his ankle heals up properly, he's a third guard, but he can also play both guard spots because of the size and the shooting that he brings to the table. And I certainly think there's a place for him as a depth piece, especially because, as I said, Ethan, the guys that brought him here, the guys that coveted him the most in the offseason, are still running this organization and making the decisions. And like, how much they liked him and how much they thought he could help them, that hasn't changed just because he couldn't be out there and he couldn't be healthy enough to actually give minutes.
And it's interesting you say that, Chris, because Ty Jerome, over his career, is a 35% three-point shooter and averaged 7 points per game. Obviously, his second season in the NBA was his best. He averaged 10.7 points alongside the Oklahoma City Thunder. And you also think about what he's able to bring as a guard who can play multiple positions. As you said, point guard, shooting guard are both options for him. But you also understand how many guards are in this current roster and this current rotation. And what that means for somebody who was not able to be out there while other guys were making progress up the rotation sheet. And that brings us to our next guy, because I don't want to harp on Ty Jerome too much because.
But before you move on, I think this is important. I think he benefits greatly from the situation changing and a new coaching staff coming in, because it's a clear-eyed perspective. It's a fresh perspective. There's nothing being held against him from last year. If that would have been the case, like, I don't want to say that JB Bickerstaff wouldn't have had any faith in him whatsoever, but there are guys on this roster that had an opportunity to build trust with JB and instill confidence in JB of what they could do for him in their system. Right now, it's a clean slate almost for Ty. Yeah, the decision makers are still here, but from a coaching staff perspective, there is no built-in faith that Karis LeVert has as an edge over, if it's James Borrego, as an edge over Ty Jerome. Right? There is no built-in faith that Isaac Okoro has over Ty Jerome or Craig Porter Jr., for that matter. You know what I mean? So a new coaching staff coming in with new ideas and fresh eyes, Ty's going to benefit from that, even if it's in a roundabout way. And even if, his minute load is not going to be 20 to 25 minutes a night or something like that, the fact that it is a new coaching staff, I do think that helps him in this situation.
And we also talked about, when we talked about Sam Merrill and guys on this roster who have contract-friendly things going on that can help their case with the Cavs, Ty Jerome is one of those guys. And I believe that he is scheduled to be on for another season, contracted to be on for another season. So there is no debate whether he'll be back or not, other than if he gets traded. But I think that Ty Jerome being out, I mean, it does help that there's a new coaching staff that comes in, but I think it's also a difficult situation as a player because you don't have the same confidence that you came into this year with. You have to completely regain and regroup from a situation that you've really never had to deal with before, because Ty Jerome hasn't been out a whole season before. He's been out a good amount for different reasons, but not a whole year. So,
and like his entire year was spent rehabbing an injury. Think about all of the development opportunities for somebody like Ty, who still is a young player, who still is trying to find his footing in the NBA, find the right spot for him in his career. For somebody like that to miss a whole year of development opportunities behind the scenes because his entire focus is on getting his ankle right and rehabbing that ankle, that's tough.
So speaking of development, another guy that we want to talk about in an exit interview style way is Craig Porter Jr. He's actually, when I asked the subtexters who they wanted to hear from us next, it was between him and Sam Merrill. So we got to get into this one, Chris. And Craig Porter Jr. is a guy that came in undrafted, had a great summer league, great camp, and earned his way onto a two-way contract. And then throughout the season, earned himself an extension contract as well. So you understand what it takes as an undrafted rookie to get that kind of respect from the organization to say that we believe in you. We understand what your value is and what you can do. And I think it's important that we look at what Craig Porter Jr. was able to do this season, but also looking at how his season ended, because that can impact his summer and what's going on with him. So I'm going to start from the summer and go backwards. So just today, Craig Porter Jr. posted on his Instagram story hooping in some Donovan Mitchell hoop shoes. So that just shows that he was getting some work in on his ankle, which he injured in the last game of the regular season against the Charlotte Hornets when he was playing extended minutes with a majority of the regular guys sitting out, like Donovan Mitchell, Darius Garland, and Karis LeVert. So now we're thinking about his overall season, Chris, because you end on a sour note like that with an injury. We want to look back at the good that happened with Craig Porter Jr. in his first year in the NBA. And this is a guy that is 24 years old. We know how much he got as experience at Wichita State. He played in 51 games. He even got to start in 6 games for the Cavs in his rookie season. He shot 50.9% from the floor and 35.3% from three-point range. And I know that might be surprising to some people because it was uncommon for him to take 3-point shots, but there were times during the season when Donovan Mitchell would be like, yeah, we've been telling him to shoot more from deep. So that's just a funny situation to look at going forward. But you also want to look at the offensive rating numbers and things of that nature as well, because you know we go deep here on Wine and Gold Talk podcast. And he was the 10th ranked offensive rated player for the Cavs this season. He was even better ranked on offensive rating than Evan Mobley. Which is interesting to look at. But we know that there were different moments in the season where he was seeing different looks. He was getting different opportunities in situations where you wouldn't normally see them, especially with Darius Garland being out for an extended period. I wanted to get your overall take of Craig Porter Jr.'s season, Chris.
He was a revelation, Ethan. There's nobody that expected him to go from undrafted priority free agent to a guy who got a multi-year NBA contract off of a two-way. There was just opportunities presented itself, and he capitalized on them. But the idea of Craig Porter Jr. was that he was going to spend most of his first season with the G League charge, and he was going to lead that team, and he was going to learn how to be a professional, and he was going to learn the system and all that kind of stuff and be able to play through his mistakes and get consistent minutes and opportunities. Every time he went down to the G League with the charge, he just looked like a guy who was too good for that league because he played himself into an opportunity with the Cavs. And look, Darius Garland got hurt. Ricky Rubio had his whole situation, and Ty Jerome wasn't available after the second game of the year. So the Cavs needed another ball handler. They needed the things that Craig brought to the table. And I give him a lot of credit because his first game, where he got extended playing time on the road, inside the Chase Center against the Golden State Warriors, it's an end of game situation, and they just foul him repeatedly. And he's on the floor, and he looks completely lost, and he looks like a rookie would, an undrafted rookie would, in that kind of situation. And for him to go from that, a situation where it's like JB Bickerstaff has to bring the starters back in to close out this game because you're making all these mistakes and you're missing these free throws and the game's starting to slip away. For him to go from that to a guy who was really, really good in terms of running the offense and keeping his focus and not looking rattled and running pick and roll stuff with Jarrett Allen and being on the floor in an in-season tournament matchup against the Philadelphia 76ers and holding his own in that kind of environment against that caliber team. It was unbelievable to see such a quick rise for him and for him to shake off all of that first game stuff and turn himself into this guy who deserved a standard NBA contract because he was just too good and too valuable for this team to be playing on a two-way contract for the entire year. And if we flash it forward and we start thinking about the future of Craig Porter Jr., look, the Cavs like him. There's no doubt about that. They tried to get a second round pick on draft night because they were going to draft Craig, and they were worried about somebody drafting him and them not getting an opportunity to sign him as an undrafted free agent. So they kept trying to get a second round pick after the Imani Bates selection. They just weren't successful, and they were sitting there all draft night, and they were basically holding their breath, hoping that they would get an opportunity to sign him. They did, but that tells you how much they like him and how much they have valued him from the very beginning. And then you add in the fact of how he played, especially throughout injuries. There was one point where one member of the organization, Ethan, said, Chris, where would we be without Craig Porter Jr.? We didn't have Darius for 6 weeks. We didn't have anybody that could be a backup point guard for us. We had to play Karis LeVert at backup point guard. We had to play Max Strus as a primary ball handler at the time. Where would we be without Craig Porter Jr.? He helped the Cavs get through a pretty rough stretch, or what could have been a rough stretch of the season. Forget the numbers, right? Forget any kind of production. Like, just having that second guy that the Cavs could go to at various points throughout that stretch was really, really meaningful for them. And they see him as a backup point guard caliber player. And he's going to be fighting with Ty Jerome. And maybe if the Cavs bring in like another guy in the draft, or if they bring in another guy in free agency, if Darius Garland's not here, who knows what the situation's going to be like, what the roster is going to be like. But the bottom line is the Cavs view him as an NBA caliber backup point guard. And I don't think there were a lot of people that expected that when, draft night passed, he went undrafted, and then the Cavs signed some undrafted rookie free agent from Wichita State that barely made any kind of headlines.
100%, Chris. And you mentioned him going to the G League. According to the NBA G League official website, Craig played 2 games in the G League. He averaged 23.5 points per game, shot 51.4% from the field, and he was grabbing rebounds and facilitating assists, and he averaged 2.5 steals per game and 1.5 blocks per game. So you thinking about a guy coming from Wichita State who we knew could fill up the stat sheet, and then you send him down to the G League after being with the Cavs for a majority of the season, and he's like, I'm not supposed to be here. Let me show y'all why. Because he would just go to town. And I remember we would have other reporters go and cover those games. Jonathan Simmons from cleveland.com would hit me up, and he's like, why is this guy here? Like, what are we talking about? Like, he's on a different level than the G League players. And the Cavs recognize that and continue to move with that. And Cavs fans recognized it too. I'm not going to leave them out, because we even got some subtexters asking me to ask you, Chris, is Craig Porter Jr. viable to be a starter? Don't shoot the messenger. Don't shoot the messenger. But we're talking about if Darius Garland is not with the team this season, and whatever happens with Karis LeVert, who we know is better suited for the 6-man role with this team currently, what do you think happens with Craig Porter Jr. and his role? And especially, like you said, he's going to be fighting with Ty Jerome already, but knowing that Ty wasn't available this past season, Craig Porter Jr. was making this rise during that same time. We don't know what's going to happen with Darius. You mentioned that he's a NBA backup in the eyes of the Cleveland Cavaliers at some point in his career. He's going to get there. But could it happen sooner than we're expecting with what happens with the Cavs this offseason?
I mean, as a backup, sure. I mean, I think that's viable. As a starter for a team that advanced to the Eastern Conference semifinals and wants to go beyond that coming into this year, starting Craig Porter Jr., no, not at this stage of his career. There's just too much development that he still needs to do as a player. There are still too many weaknesses that he has as a player, especially on the offensive end of the floor. He needs to see more things. He needs more meaningful game reps. He needs to develop more of a reliable outside shot. Obviously, Craig, as he continued to go throughout the course of this season, he was seeing different looks and different strategies against him. But for the most part, teams were just going under screens because they didn't respect his shot enough. He doesn't have the same kind of capabilities as somebody like Darius in terms of breaking down a defense, getting into the teeth of the paint, consistently at the same level as Darius. Like, in the small samples that we saw of Craig, he was basically living in the paint. And he was really, really good when it came to running pick and roll. But that's such a small sample size. When all of a sudden you're the lead ball handler, when all of a sudden you're organizing the offense, all of a sudden you're trying to get everybody involved and get them in a rhythm and stuff like that. And the defense is geared to slowing you down, and they understand your strengths and your weaknesses and your limitations as a player. It's a lot different when you're in that kind of role. So no, I think for him, it's continuing to get comfortable as a backup point guard, understanding the nuances of the position, especially playing in the NBA with these teammates, understanding different schemes that defenses are going to throw against you. There's just so much more that he has to learn about being an NBA player and an NBA point guard in general, that he's not ready for that level of responsibility yet. And it's no offense to him. Like I said, he was a revelation this year. The fact that he worked himself off of a two-way contract into a standard deal, that speaks to who he is as a player, the talent that he has, the work ethic he has, the character that he has, and all that kind of stuff. But we're talking about going from the 11th guy in a rotation to a starter on a team that has, big time aspirations. Too early for that.
I agree. And I think the conversation is more so depending on whoever the Cavs continue to have on this team for this season, if Craig is going to be a backup's backup or if he's going to be the backup of this team for the point guard spot. But, and I wanted
if
to
the Cavs move on from Darius, the reality is they believe that Donovan is ready to be the sole driver of the offense. Or the Cavs find, somebody else that's way cheaper than Darius that may be a better fit alongside Donovan as opposed to Darius. If you think about it, in Utah, he had Mike Conley next to him, somebody just like running the show, a steady force, not a dynamic player, not an offensive scoring machine or anything along those lines, just like a table setter. So if the Cavs move on from Darius, either Donovan becomes the full-time point guard or they find a table setter in the mold of, not this guy specifically, but in the mold of Ricky Rubio.
And Chris, I did a quick look back on Craig's Instagram page before I wanted to ask this question, and it does look like when I originally looked at the picture, I was just looking at the shoes and what was on his feet or his ankle, but there does seem to be an ankle brace nearby in the photo. And I wanted to know if you had any updates on him when it comes to his ankle injury that he suffered in the final game of the season against the Charlotte Hornets.
Well, when I was talking to Craig throughout the course of the playoffs, he kept telling me that the series against the Magic was completely out of the question, and the series against the Boston Celtics was probably out of the question too, because historically when he's had that same kind of injury to his ankle, it's taken 14 to 21 days or something along those lines, and it was pretty bad. He was in a bit of a wheel thing, whatever it was that allowed him to get around whatever that thing was. And I looked at his ankle, and it was very, very swollen, and it was very, very bruised. And he said that he has had ankle issues in the past. So everything that he was telling me was that if the Cavs would have been able to advance past Boston, which was always going to be a tough task, but if they would have been able to do that, he probably would have been available for the conference finals. So I don't think it was anything that was going to impact his off season in a significant way. I don't think it was anything that was going to rob him of an opportunity to continue to develop his game and work this offseason the way that he wanted to. He was getting closer and closer to a recovery. He was starting to do more on-court work type stuff. And if the Cavs would have advanced further in the playoffs, he would have been available. Would he have played? Who knows? Probably not. But he would have been available. At least that was his belief. It wasn't a situation like Donovan or Dean Wade, where both of those guys admitted that they were going to have to take some time in the offseason before getting back into their routine, their usual offseason routine. At least that's not the sense that I got from talking to Craig.
And we did see Craig during shoot-arounds later into the Boston Celtics series, in Cleveland, getting some guard work in, mimicking some pick and roll things of that nature. That's what Chris is talking about when talking about on-court action. But I also did notice on Donovan Mitchell's social media that I know he said he was going to take some time off, but Donovan is the ultimate competitor. So he was at least in the gym talking about the weight room this past week or something of that notion. But I think that's where we're going to leave this podcast off, Chris, because don't want to go back to the Ty Jerome right now. Not too much to go into with Donovan Mitchell. We're going to save that for when the Cavs can talk to him more and there's a better understanding of the decision when it comes to Donovan and the Cavs. But that's it for Craig Porter Jr.'s exit interview. And with all that being said, that'll wrap up today's episode of the Wine and Gold Talk podcast. But remember to become a Cavs insider and interact with Chris and me by subscribing to Subtext. Sign up for a 14-day free trial or visit cleveland.com/Cavs and click on the blue bar at the top of the page. If you don't like it, that's fine. All you have to do is text the word STOP. It's easy. But we can tell you that the people who sign up stick around because this is the best way to get insider coverage on the Cavs from me and Chris. This isn't just our podcast, it's your podcast. And the only way to have your voice heard is through Subtext. Y'all be safe. We out.